What if you found yourself in a land you thought was paradise, only to realize the gods of that land were man-made? Would you still call it paradise? Yuji Kaku's Hell's Paradise asks us this very question, as it follows a shinobi called Gabimaru the Hollow, along with a group of convicts and executioners, on a quest to find the elixir of life in exchange for an absolving pardon. This quest leads them to a mysterious island dubbed Shinsenkyo, meaning Divine Paradise, where the elixir of life was alleged to exist. It didn't take long to realize, however, that the island was inhabited by monsters resembling a fusion of Buddhist and Taoist deities, thus drawing scrutiny from the landing party. If these monsters were truly divine, then why did they resemble a hodgepodge of man-made religious imagery? And what implications did this have about the rest of this divine paradise known as Shinsenkyo? The more we look for answers, however, the more we'll realize that Hell's Paradise is actually about the advent of science and an exploration of how the natural world becomes religion. Hello Funkers, Tony Funk here, and today we're going to explore the island of Kotaku, also known as Shinsenkyo, and explain the religious imagery, its origins, and what the actual role of Buddhism and Taoism are in Hell's Paradise. And yes, this breakdown will include spoilers for the anime, so you have been warned. One of the most important concepts in this series is Tao. In Mandarin, Tao roughly translates to road or path, but has held an esoteric meaning for most of its recorded history. Tao in the religion of Taoism refers to the nature of the universe as an ephemeral flow, thus making Tao a near impossible concept to translate or even understand. It can then be loosely understood as the way, or even the force if we want to get cheeky. Despite this esoteric origin, Tao is used in a much more tangible way in Hell's Paradise, and though its usage in the series is still mystical, it's used as a building block to concisely explain all things magical. In the same way that gravity and electromagnetism are accepted by us, despite most of us not understanding their mechanics, Tao is used as a force of nature that gets exploited and conflated with Buddhist and Taoist teachings. This is predominantly seen with the occurrences and beings of the island of Kotaku, aka Shinsenkyo, but in order to explore how Hell's Paradise turns the concept of Tao into an allegory for the mystification of science, we must look at how it manifests in the characters from outside Shinsenkyo. So before we explore Shinsenkyo, we must first understand the power system of Tao within the series. For those who don't know, a power system is a narrative structure used to explain where a character's powers and abilities are derived from. Gabimaru is first seen using Tao by practicing ninjutsu in Chapter 1, when after accepting Sagiri's offer to have a chance at being pardoned, he ignites his own body and dispatches the guards that defied the Shogun's orders. It is later explained that all of the ninjutsu moves have naturalistic explanations for how they work, with Ninpo Hiboshi, also known as Ascetic Blade, being explained as the heating up of one's body heat until their natural body oils combust. Ninpo Nenshi, as seen with Yuzuriha, is also no different, with it consisting of an acute control over her bodily fluids to use as weapons. But how exactly does one even go about controlling aspects of their body that are outside of the brain's control? Well, through Tao, of course. In Chapter 37, we are introduced to Ninpo Kawarimi, which is a ninjutsu that allows the user to disappear in plain sight by manipulating their own Tao so that it emanates at a lower volume and thus causes the user to escape someone's attention. The naturalistic explanation for this is that the user evades attention by becoming less noticeable. Again, a Tao-related power with a realistic explanation. Now let's look at how the samurai also use Tao. When it comes to Sagiri, we see her struggle with self-confidence as she cannot execute criminals with resolve. This causes minor hesitations as she strikes, and despite her being one of the most capable samurai in the Asaemon clan, she finds herself incapable of making a clean cut. This is manifested by images of her being held back by personifications of her own doubt. What ends up happening with Sagiri then is that she conflates her hesitation to kill with an inability to do her job properly, and as such, she gets in the way of her own Tao. As previously mentioned, Tao is the way of the universe, and by doubting the reality of the universe, one finds themselves in discord with nature. It isn't until Sagiri finds the middle way during her battle with Rokaruta that she begins to understand how Tao operates. In essence, the less she fights with the reality of her nature, the more harmony she is in with her own Tao, and in turn, the deadlier her blade becomes. Shion is another samurai that used Tao, however in a different way. Shion, being blind, could not rely on his eyes for information, and as a result obtained information about the world through a phenomenon he referred to as waves. Though originally in the manga it is believed that he was referring to sound, we later learned that he can visualize other organisms' Tao and create a mental image of his environment. By removing sight from the equation, Shion is able to go the middle path with more ease by not being burdened by visual stimulation. His handicap, then, gives him no other choice but to go with the flow of the universe in order to navigate the world. This, incidentally, causes him to always be in harmony with Tao no matter what happens. Tamiya Gantetsusai is another character who learns to use Tao. What's interesting is that his method consisted of blinding himself in order to achieve the same level of handicap that Shion had, and as such, gave him the necessity to detect Tao Fa through Tao alone. This meant that for a formidable warrior such as Gantetsusai, Tao could only be achieved through a self-inflicted handicap. Another convict with the ability to use Tao was Chobe, who developed the skill of using Tao after he was infected by the vines of the Tan Pit. His love for his brother Toma caused his body to invest its last remaining energy to will itself to hybridize with the flower Tao and keep his agency alive. In Chobe's particular case, the middle path was thrusted upon him when his body had no other option but to assimilate the Waitanhua flower and become a half-human, half-tan hybrid for the sake of his brother's protection. After analyzing some of the most adept human Tao practitioners, we notice a pattern about Tao. And though yes, Tao can be categorized as a force that can be subdivided by its affinity to the 5 elements, in essence, all Tao stems from the same source: acceptance. This explains why not only humans have Tao, animals, plants, and even inanimate objects have some level of acceptance, which is why they can be detected through Tao. For example, inanimate objects exist in the world without having a will that contradicts the flow, or rather, the Tao of the universe. This causes them to generate waves, and thus be detected by practitioners of Tao. The less accepting one is of their own truth, the more difficult it becomes to access Tao. When it came to Gabimaru, despite him fearing at times that his wife could be a figment of his imagination, whenever he chose to believe in her and the belief that he would see her again, his Tao surged, and he became significantly more powerful than when he relied on strategic fighting alone. If Tao, then, is the manifestation of a being's harmony with the universal truth, what did the religious elements of Shinsenkyo represent, and what implications did they have? During the Qin dynasty, an attendant of the royal court known as Chufu, or Jofuku in Japanese, traveled to the island of Kotaku under the emperor's orders to find the elixir of life. Under the false belief that the elixir of life would be found on the island, he decided to reside on it in an attempt to either find it, or if push came to shove, create it. Under the Taoist and Buddhist understandings of his time that he and his followers brought with them, Jofuku began to experiment on life on the island, including the very same people who accompanied him on his journey. His experiments led him to discover the power of life's flow state, which under his previous religious understandings he called Tao. Though his experiments took form and his research gained breakthrough after breakthrough, his religious convictions remained, and many of his creations, particularly the Soshin, took the forms of his religious beliefs, despite them being abominations of flesh and the flow state he called Tao. But his cruelty did not end there, as he stripped living beings from their own flow state or acceptance, and in doing so created a substance called Tan, which was essentially the liquid Tao that was removed from the subject. This, of course, led him to enhance his own lifespan by adding other beings' acceptance and will to live to his own at the cost of arborification. As observed in real life, the longest living lifespans on Earth belong to trees, due to the retention of stem cell-like meristematic cells after every growth cycle. It is only natural then that in order to sustain Jofuku's extended lifespan, he must succumb to arborification or face death. As we all know, Jofuku eventually died, unable to work around nature's law, and left his wife Rien and their infants behind to complete his research. That is, until the Shogun's men arrived. When we look at Yuji Kaku's influences, we can see in a Q&A in the Hell's Paradise fanbook titled Jigokuraku Katai Shinsho that Kaku's greatest narrative influence for Hell's Paradise was the island of Dr. Moreau. This novel followed a researcher named Edward Pendrick, who was shipwrecked on an island in the South Pacific. He was later rescued by a boat en route to Dr. Moreau's island, which was an island full of human-animal hybrids that were the result of the doctor's experimentation. After living on the island amongst the hybrids called beast people, Edward escapes, only to live the rest of his life with PTSD from the experience. Based on this influence, which Kaku himself called the skeleton of the Hell's Paradise story, we can see then that the Soshin are no more than beast people experiments who were made in Jofuku's perception of the divine, and as a result, were nothing more than the manifestation of his science masquerading as religion. And after seeing how Tao is achieved by the benevolence of human spirit, we can interpret that as life's will to live through acceptance and grace. Hell's Paradise's depictions of Tao, then, are not meant to be understood as elements of a Taoist teaching, but rather as a conflation of science and religion. And as such, Paradise cannot exist, but neither can Hell, because they were both created by man. So, is Hell's Paradise really about science? Well, not really, but rather the mysticism we ascribe to the beauty of life we call paradise, and the hell we create when we want to tamper with it.